Hello, I'm Hannah. I'm Scribe Support Accountant, and this is the third video in the series of 4 dealing with completing year-end on Scribe. This one's looking at completing the annual return on an income and expenditure basis. So at this point, this is assuming that all your data is on Scribe, is accurate, you've checked it, and your bank reconciliation is balancing. If this is not the case and you still need to make sure your bank reconciliation is working out, you want to check your opening balances, it may be worth going back and watching the Preparing for Year-End video, so the first video in this series of videos. So all being well, if everything is on and balancing, then you're ready to go. It's worth taking a copy of your bank reconciliation if you haven't done so already under Reconcile All Banks, because this is directly related to your annual return when you come to running at that point and will be a useful part of your year-end paperwork. So just go into Reconcile All Banks, and if you haven't already kept a copy of your end of March position, just rerun that. So as at the 31st of March, all these accounts and the date of the statement at that point, run the report as so, which shows the closing position on Scribe, checking, making sure that it equals itself, so A equals B, so the position on Scribe balances to the bank statement position. If it doesn't, if something's not working out in here, then there are some additional help notes on how to find differences, or again, it's worth watching the Preparing for Year-End video as this talks about this in a bit more detail. But at this point, it would just be a case of keeping a copy. So all reports on Scribe can be printed using the print icon over on here on the top right, or you can download them up here and just put it into PDF to save a copy of it. So that's the first part of it. It's also worth making sure that your VAT position is correct at this point. So if you're VAT registered, it's very likely that your VAT return quarters will fall at the end of March, so you'll have put something in anyway. And if you're not VAT registered but just claiming it back, then I'd recommend putting in a VAT claim at this point. You don't have to, it's not mandatory, but if you can, then it's nice just to keep it in line with the year-end position as well. If you want to do that, you can come into the VAT Form 126 report under the VAT menu, and this was where it will enable you to run it. Depending on when you last ran it to will depend on the first point to run it from here, but if you've not run it at all for the year, then you can put in the entire year date so that you run it for this financial year in its entirety, which will look like this. And it's just a case of running this, which would return all VATable items that you've entered with their details against them. At the bottom, it will give you a figure, which is what you'd be claiming. So this is where you can then check that your VAT position is correct. Even if you're not going to necessarily put a claim in, it might be worth just checking it to check that this looks right before you then carry it over. The way the VAT is dealt with on the annual return is a bit more key when you're income and expenditure, because it will be held as a position on the balance sheet and adjusted for, whereas it's just included in the annual return and receipts and payments. So it's pretty important to make sure that your VAT position is correct. So if you have got time to put this in, it is worth putting a claim in at this point. When you've run this report, if you do find there's anything gaps, for example, against a supplier where the VAT number's missing, you can go back up to the setup menu against the supplier and add in a VAT number in the VAT field, and when you then rerun this report, you'll see that appearing. Other than that, all being well, if you've done this already, absolutely fine, and then your VAT position's correct, you're ready to go. So at this point, all your data is on, accurate, everything up to the 31st of March is included, regardless of whether or not it has gone out of the statement yet. Your VAT position is correct and your bank reconciliation is balancing. So ready to start looking at year-end in income and expenditure. So this is all dealt with in this menu option here. So if you want to do an income and expenditure, do make sure you've got the correct year-end menu. If this is reading receipts and payments, you would need to go to the council profile and just amend it to show as income and expenditure to ensure you get all the relevant menu options for completing the year-end in income and expenditure, because obviously there's a little more going on than if you were just doing it in receipts and payments. So the first thing that you'll see in here is calculate. So just to understand how this works, all the reports within the year-end menu on Scribe do not calculate automatically. So any other report that you run within Scribe will just have updated to any information that you've put on. It will be live as at that date. Under the year-end menu, it's not, you need to calculate. So if you ever come in here and run reports, they're not running as they expected to, they're giving you errors, it may simply be that you've forgotten to run calculate. So it may be worth getting into the habit of just coming in every time you come in here to do anything year-end related, running calculate. It's just literally a case of clicking start here, and it will just show that it's updated correctly in here so that you know all the current balances and everything, all the reports are correctly in here. So the first thing we then come to is the asset register. which is clearly just a list of all your assets. There's two approaches that you can take on Scribe. It may be that you will have a comprehensive list of all your assets outside of Scribe, so another spreadsheet or another way of recording them all. If you therefore don't want to put them all into Scribe, you can just have one line that may say council assets with a purchase value against them, and that will be what feeds through to the annual return. Or equally, you may want to use this as your comprehensive listing, so everything's listed in here, all the details of your assets are in here individually, and therefore this is where you can maintain everything. So at year end point, it's just a case of coming into here, updating anything you need to, if you need to add one, amend one as you need to. If you need to change anything, you can go to more, edit, amend the values and information, whatever it is in here, and just make sure it's updated. Once you've done that, you can view the report and keep a copy of that, as this will be part of your year-end paperwork to give the details of what's appearing on the annual return. So in here, the total purchase value will be what feeds through to the fixed assets box on the annual return. So in a little while, when we come to the point of running an annual return, we'll see the 101,000 showing in the relevant box. So that's asset register. Borrowings works on a fairly similar position with regards to any loans that you may have. So it's just a case of coming in here and updating it to the most recent outstanding amount. So if you're making repayments against a loan, you just need to make sure that this figure's up to date as at the year end, because this will be the figure that feeds through. And again, you can just come in here to edit, amend it. So for any payments that you've made and this outstanding amount is reduced, just update that. Again, you can save that. Again, you can view the report in here. And what you'll find is that the outstanding amount will be what appears on the annual return. So when we get to running that in a little while, we'll see that £5,000 appearing on there. Okay, so that deals with the asset register and borrowings to make up boxes 9 and 10 at the bottom. We can now look at adjustments. So this is the part when we start getting into income and expenditure and the conversion from receipts and payments into income and expenditure. So Scribe has worked on a receipts and payments basis throughout the year, and we're now ready to convert to income and expenditure. So adjustments here. And this is where you need to come in and add in the adjustments, i.e. reflecting anything that's happened outside of the year that you need to take account of. So for example, if you've had work done in March and received an invoice, or even if you haven't received an invoice and then payment's not made until April or onwards, you need to adjust for that because the work relates to the old financial year but the payment was made in the new. Equally, it may be that you've got something that you've paid for ahead of time. So if you've paid for an insurance renewal, but actually some of that insurance relates to the following year, you may want to adjust for that. So anything that you've identified, so any invoices that relate to different parts of the year they want to adjust for, or even if you know some work's been done and you're due an invoice but you've not yet received it, you may need to put an adjustment in for that. That can be done in this screen simply by clicking Add Adjustment up on the top right up here and putting in the information. So there's a few different types of the adjustment that you're putting in, so debts outstanding, outstanding bills such as accruals, prepayments are paid in advance. So select the relevant one. If you're not sure, there's some more detail within the help notes online that will explain to you what exactly that means and what effect it will have on the accounts. Okay, select the date, so generally it probably be a March dated item that's not gone through. Cost centre and the cost code, so if you select them, it will adjust accordingly to the correct cost centre to put that through for you. Description, so you know what it is, and the supplier, so you can log back to it to see what it relates to. Net value, the adjustment, so you can see what it is. And it's just a case of adding it so it appears in the list. So I've got one in here at the moment where I've had the final quarter's electricity bill received in March, but I'm not going to be paid to April, so I need to make an adjustment for it. So you continue entering each individual adjustment as so until you've got a list of all of them. Again, you can view the report here, which will show everything. This is also quite useful because it will show you what it's going to do. So we've received the bill, not been paid, and therefore we need to increase the expenditure because this expenditure relates to the current financial year, but it's not going to be made until 2021. Okay, so this will show you everything that's going to go through, and again it's worth keeping a copy of this as it will start to build up the picture of the conversion from receipts and payments into income and expenditure. Okay, so that deals with adjustments. Quick note about reserves in here. So this is purely to show the correct figures on the bottom of the income and expenditure account and also the balance sheet. So this will just be the final year's figures that you want to show. So if anything's moved since the beginning of the year, I haven't got any reserves set up in here, but if you did and you wanted to amend them, you just put in the transfers to get to the final figures that you want to show on the balance sheet. Okay. So that deals with reserves. Then we've got temporary assets. Generally, I wouldn't find that you'd be using this. I don't think I've ever come across anybody who has these figures showing them on the balance sheet. But if you did want to have a specific work in progress, temporary lendings on the balance sheet, you can enter figures in here and that will update accordingly. As it says, if you have any doubts, leave it 0. So that deals with that. We've then done all the entries we need to do. So we've checked the asset register, we've checked borrowings, we've added the adjustments, and we've amended any reserves as we need to. So at this point, even though we've done so already, it's worth running Calculate. Just get into the habit of running Calculate regularly. If you amend anything, add any details in, run Calculate so that it updates the reports. So now what we've done is we've put in all the information required in order to convert from receipts and payments to income and expenditure. So from the working document down, these are the reports that will show you how that change has been made, what's going to go through and how the adjustments are affecting accounts, and therefore support what you'll see on the annual return. So we'll work through and look at those in turn. Firstly, we've got the working document. So when we click into that, it runs it as so. So what we get here is all the different cost centres that we've got set up within Scribe and the summary figures against them in A. So A shows us what it was as at a receipts and payments position. So before we did any year-end conversion, these were the figures as were in Scribe. B will show us any last year's adjustments. So if you were using income and expenditure last year and you had some adjustments that you put in, they will now either reverse or go in as you need to show them in here, and you can see the effect that's going to go through against them. Then you've got this year in here. So C is showing what's going to go through against it. So you may remember I put that accrual in for my electricity bill of £136, and we can see that in column C. So then the final column here, so A minus B plus C, will give us our income and expenditure figures. So these are the figures that will now be used to complete the annual return. So it's a case of taking the receipts and payments basis, making the adjustments in B and C, and therefore we get the final income and expenditure figures as shown in here. So it's a working document. Again, keep a copy of that by downloading or printing it, because again, this will be a background to the final year-end figures that you produce. That's the working document. We've then got the income and expenditure account, which looks like this. So again, it pulls it all through. So this is really a breakdown of what we just looked at. So this is using the income and expenditure level figures. So taking into account any adjustments that we've put through. We can also see last year if relevant, we're interested in that. And we can see our final balance sheet figures on here as well. So this is what we'll see on there and how the general fund has been calculated. So again, keep a copy of this as you work through. At this point, if you do identify anything that is untoward, you may need to investigate it if some of these figures don't look correct. But I would have expected by now that you would have gone through the detailed cost centre and just ensured that everything coding-wise is accurate and correct. So nothing here should flag up anything odd looking. It should just be a case of working through the conversion. Okay. But if you do find anything and you need to make any amendments, once you've done so, if you recalculate, these will be updated accordingly if necessary. Okay, so we can now run the balance sheet next in the list here, which will look like this. So Scribe will pull everything through for you to give you a balancing balance sheet, as you can see. In here, it'll also show you last year's position as to what went through. So any details, if any adjustments, I had a credit of £120 last year, and now we can see the 136 relating to that electricity bill appearing in here. It also works out our VAT position. So if providing you've checked that and you're happy with that figure on here, then that will show on there, and you can see everything working through as you can here. And at the bottom, if you put any reserve figures in on that reserves page we looked at to update, if you could keep capital and earmarks separately on here, you would also see that. Now this one prints out with a signed and dated option at the bottom. So again, if you want to take this to your year-end meetings, your finals, or signing off the financial statements, you can take that along and get these signed off. But again, it's worth keeping a copy of this as well as part of all your year-end paperwork. Okay, so then we've got to the point now we're ready to run the annual return. Okay, so click into that and it will run as so. So it tells us that we've run it on income and expenditure basis and our year-end, as we can see here, and it pulls all the information through. Now, if you've got a blank last year in here, then it means that you probably haven't closed off last year. It may be that you've not had a financial year in. This is your first financial year in Scribe, so there's no detail, and all you'll see is box 7 and 8, and it's just a case of checking them that box 7 has become box 1. But if this is completely blank, then it's likely that you haven't closed off your previous financial year, and if so, you need to go back into 18-19 and close and copy over the figures so that you get a prior year in this current annual return here. If you're not sure how to do that, there is a separate video regarding closing off the old year and starting the new one that you can watch that will show you how to do that. Okay, so other than that, it's just a case of casting your eye down and making sure you're happy with the figures that have pulled through into here, that they make sense, that they look appropriate for what you're expecting to see in here. If you find that the preset box is blank, for example, or maybe staff cost hasn't got everything or not much in it, it may be down to the setup isn't completed successfully for the cost codes. If they haven't allocated the correct type, then the amounts may not show in the correct boxes. Now that can be resolved under the setup menu. So if you go to setup, cost codes, and if it was preset, for example, that wasn't showing in the correct box, if you just find the relevant cost code for the precept, so you can sort it by typing in precept if not. So the fourth field here, this type, this is where you allocate the items relevant to completing the annual return so that it runs correctly. So the cost code for the precept needs to be allocated the type of the precept so that anything that you put against that code will therefore appear in the precept box. This needs to be the same for anything staff related. You need to ensure that you've allocated the type staff in here, and if you have a loan and you have a code for capital repayment, that also needs to be allocated the capital repayment code. So if you need to amend any of these, you just change them as so and save it. This will then update. So if you had done this, you'd need to recalculate if they would have found some issues in there, and then it's just a case of rerunning the annual return in here. And this should have resolved any issues where you've got a blank. If you had a blank showing where it hadn't copied over correctly, it followed through and then you needed to show it in there. Okay, so then once you're happy with everything, as you can see at the bottom, we talked about the fixed assets and the borrowings. They fed through the figures that we looked at previously. And now, once you've got to this point, it's just a case of being able to put these figures into the annual return form as supplied to you by the auditor. Just a case of taking them over and rounding them up, as that's how they want it, in total pound figures rather than the pence on the end. Okay, because you're working in your income expenditure, your box 7 and your box 8 figure will be different. This will be partly due to the VAT, but also down to any adjustments you've put through. And you probably already know that the auditor will expect an explanation for the difference between box 7 and box 8. So you can get that by running the final report within the year-end menu on Scribe, which is called Reconcile Box 7 and Box 8, which looks like this. So what it will show, you've got in here box 7 at the top, you've got box 8 at the bottom, and the difference, what it's reflected by. So the VAT position will be in here, and then the adjustments that you've put in, according to what effect those adjustments have, i.e. whether you add them on or take them off, depend on where they show, but it will break it all down for you. This will match up to your adjustments report that you'll have run off. So you've got that behind the scenes as well, but this will show you everything that you need to in order to explain the difference between box 7 and box 8. Okay, so that's everything that you need to do in terms of the year end. Obviously, make sure you keep a copy of all your reports and that they all match off and everything's in there as it should do, and then that explains everything that you need. Once you've worked through this, you've done everything, that's all great. But if you do find that you have any issues, things aren't balancing, there's some figures appearing that you're not sure about, you need to investigate, you need to change, you're worried about something in there, you can contact us. Do please get in touch if something's not working out. There are lots of help guides on the help centre that you can access from the home screen of Scribe that will step-by-step guides and checklists to help ensure that you're working on the year-end process correctly. But even if that's not working out or you need some one-on-one help or support, do get in touch and we'll do our best to help you.